Well, the International Air Transport Association has upgraded its outlook for profitability in the airline industry this year. IATA handed down the new forecast at its annual general meeting in Istanbul, where top executives in the sector have gathered to assess the post-pandemic recovery. About 4.35 billion people are expected to travel this year, almost back to the pre-pandemic level. Net profits for the airline industry expected to reach nearly $10 billion. That's more than double IATA's previous estimate. And total revenues will top the $800 billion mark for the first time since 2019. But the recovery is playing out differently when you compare regions. The net profit estimate exceeding $11 billion for North America carriers and $5 billion for European ones. But losses are expected in Africa and Latin America, and Asia-Pacific carriers projected to be the worst off with losses of almost $7 billion. And CNA's Roland Lim is covering the IATA annual meeting and World Air Transport Summit. He joins us now live from Istanbul. Roland, you had a wide-ranging discussion with IATA Director General Willie Walsh. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you is that there is an air of optimism here in Istanbul. As you've correctly pointed out, the industry did suffer a huge blow during the pandemic and has recovered somewhat. And that was one of the first few questions I posed to IATA Director General Willie Walsh about the global outlook for the commercial aviation space.
So at global level, we're at about 90% of where we were in 2019 today. We have seen good growth, but Asia still lags. The Asia-Pacific region still lags. That's principally down to China. And domestic travel within Asia is back above where it was in 2019, which is very encouraging. But we're seeing international travel within Asia at about 56% of where we were in 2019. Now, we expect that recovery to continue. It will be impacted by some issues like the closure of Russian airspace, but the trend is certainly very positive.
So you've overall seen a total increase in the number of total passenger traffics across the board, the various regions, Asia, Europe, as well as the Americas.
We look globally, all of the domestic markets at a global level are certainly above where they were in 2019. The Japanese domestic market is still slightly below, but we expect that to be above 2019 in the next couple of months. The Australian domestic market is probably the one that's lagged most, so it's only at about 87% of where it was in 2019. But again, globally, domestic markets, when we add it all together, is now above where we were in 2019. International markets are still recovering, but the pace of recovery is very encouraging.
Now, I also spoke to Willie Walsh about the hottest thing in the industry, and that's artificial intelligence. Here's what he had to say about that.
From my point of view, I think hydrogen actually plays a part later on. I think beyond 2050, hydrogen will be a much more important factor for the industry. And hence the reason, as an industry, we're putting so much emphasis on sustainable aviation fuel. Because the advantage of that is it's what we call a drop-in fuel, so it can be used with the existing aircraft. We don't require any technical adjustment. It can be used with existing infrastructure at airports. So it's available to us immediately, and it doesn't depend on the technology being developed by the manufacturer. So our belief is in the short, medium term, sustainable aviation fuel is a much better investment to focus on than further research and development into new technology aircraft.
Is the cost going to be passed down to the consumer?
Ultimately, this will be reflected in ticket prices. I think it's a fallacy for people to believe that you can transition to net zero at no cost. There is a huge cost associated with decarbonising any industry. So we believe that sustainable aviation fuel can be produced in greater quantities, particularly if we have the right government policy frameworks in place that incentivise production. And we are seeing that in the US, for example, significant incentives being provided by federal government and some state governments to encourage greater production of sustainable fuel. So while we see the low volumes being produced today, we're very confident that that can be ramped up and it can meet the requirements of the industry. But I would agree with you. You know, it is going to remain more expensive than traditional fuel. You can get into a debate as to, you know, whether it will cross over at some point. Personally, I believe that you know, we have to accept that we're going to pay more, and that means the cost faced by the industry will increase, and the ticket prices that we charge people will have to.
Well, I do apologize about that. That was obviously a question on sustainability and decarbonizing of the aviation industry and how it'll cost more with aviation fuel being more sustainable. But let me throw you to that thought that I promised you about artificial intelligence. Here's what Willie Walsh had to say.
I think AI has to be a factor without question. It's going to influence every business, every individual. The extent to which it influences, I think, is open for debate. I think a lot of us can see the opportunities that AI presents, and some of us are looking at the potential risks that AI presents. But without question, people will be trying to understand how can they better use AI for the benefit of their business. And we already see areas where it can play a significant part. And we've in fact been using AI in areas such as predicting maintenance requirements on aircraft, because we have lots of data. So AI enables that data to be better analysed and more accurate prediction around future requirements. So I see a lot of opportunity for our industry, and clearly there's potentially some risk for the industry there as well, but it's definitely going to be a factor for the future.
And the future is looking bright with machine learning applied to other aspects of the airline industry, including the pricing of tickets, the planning of day-to-day routes, jet fuel consumption efficiencies, as well as future biometric scanning when you're boarding. Back to you, Wei Su.
Oh, thanks so much, Roland. CNA's Roland Lim live for us at IATA's annual meeting and the World Air Transport Summit, both in Istanbul.